Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions on YouTube, and welcome to another Friday review. Today I am reviewing the 16th studio album from veteran German thrash metal band Sodom. That is Genesis 19, which was released through both Steamhammer Records in Europe and distributed here in the United States through eOne Music, both on November 27th, which was just last week. So at this point, it's still fairly new, which is absolutely great. Yes, these guys were one of the forerunners of the German thrash metal scene in the 1980s, alongside Destruction, alongside Kreator, and at times also alongside Tankard, which many seem to really consider, again, the lineup of Sodom, Destruction, Kreator, and Tankard as Germany's Big Four. So I don't know. Some may not always think that, or at least add in Tankard. For some reason, I don't know. I don't get that. Even though still that kind of has been considered Germany's Big Four. So at this point, do I really need to go any more backstory? I mean, I should definitely point out this is their follow-up to 2016's Decision Day, which I did review on this channel when it came out on that year. So anything else, and I mean, when it comes to, of course, classic albums of Sodom, again, Persecution Mania, Agent Orange, even many people even throwing Better Off Dead, but even Tapped in the Vein, then kind of speed through that year, then of course Code Red in 1999, then M16 in 2001. Or 2002, and it was any of that year, it was that. Alright, so there's plenty of classic albums, plenty of different lineup changes, but all at least Tom Angelripper being one of the most, again, the sole member. He, in many ways, yes, the most consistent, but he's still. But the thing is, Sodom is Tom Angelripper, just like how Motorhead was Lemmy and how AC/DC is Angus Young, basically at this point, you know. So Tom Angelripper is Sodom. So that's kind of leaves it there. So I think, is there any other backstory I need to go into? You know what? There really isn't. This is where we'll just go into the 16th studio album from Sodom. That is Genesis 19. So without further ado, let's get into this album. Alright, so before I really get into any of my thoughts on the album, let's do a track listing rundown. We got 12 songs here, and it all clocks in at 54 minutes and 49 seconds. So these 12 songs are Blind Superstition, which is the sole instrumental of this album, Sodom and Gomorrah, Euthanasia, the title track, Nicht mehr mein Land, which actually is German for Not My Country Anymore, Glock and Roll, The Harpooner, Dehumanized, Occult Perpetrator, Waldo and Pigpen, Indoctrination, and Friendly Fire. Now, it definitely needs to be pointed out, this is the first full-length album with Frank Blackfire being back in the band, who pretty much had returned in the band in 2018. And prior to 2018, he hadn't been back in the band, not since leaving in 1989. Which again, his final full-length album for a long time was Agent Orange. But this is his first full-length album being back in the band. So this is now making it, again, his third full-length album with Sodom. So I think it's fantastic. But also, who also came along with Frank Blackfire here is the two new members in the band, who, of course, all debuted on the Partisan EP in 2018, and again, spanning it to Out of the Frontlight Trench EP in 2018. But these two members are, of course, York Sigotts, which is also the guitar player Yes, this also should be noted that this is the first full Sodom album with Sodom as a 4-piece instead of a 3-piece. So I think it's absolutely badass. So, and of course, it definitely does end up giving the album a whole new dynamic, which is a great, and it definitely freshens up more of Sodom's sound, for sure. But Jörg Sagatz on guitars and Todi Merkel on drums, again replacing Maka, who had been in the band with Sodom from Epitome of Torture through Decision Day. So it's all great. Again, all these two members being Frank Blackfire and Jörg Sagatz, all replacing Berneman, who had been with Sodom since 1997's Till Death Do Us Unite, through, of course, then Code Red, M16, the self-titled 2006 album, In War and Pieces, Epitome of Torture, and Decision Day. So yeah, it definitely made Berneman one of definitely the most consistent guitar player in Sodom. I think it's all great that he was able to last that long with Sodom. Again, it's now a 4-piece, so as far as this album, and as far as how I feel towards Genesis 19, when I first initially had reviewed Decision Day in 2016, I do remember being quite receptive toward that album. It's been a long time. I haven't really rewatched that review anyways. Before this album was released, I was inspired to really go back and listen to some of the Sodom albums. So I pretty much went back to the early period with In the Sign of Evil and Obsessed by Cruelty, then of course to Persecution Mania, the Experts of Sodomy EP, and Agent Orange, and Better Off Dead, and then Get What You Deserve, or the Oberbit-Misson, what is it, the Oberbit-Misson EP. I might have butchered all of that. Then I kind of skipped some albums, but then I eventually went into Code Red, then M16, then I somehow skipped the 2006 album, then went into the Final Sign of Evil, and then ended up checking out In War and Pieces, Epitome of Torture, and then finally Decision Day. But prior to re-listening to Decision Day, after when I reviewed that album, for some reason, I kind of forgot about that album. I barely could remember anything off of that album, and I could never really pinpoint why. And then re-listening to it, I ended up remembering probably why I might have forgot about it. And don't get me wrong, it should be stated that Sodom, I believe, I've never really released a bad record. That's why I probably, again, it's easy for me to really consider Sodom probably the most consistent sounding of the German thrash metal bands, because Creator went in plenty different directions. At this point, I almost really couldn't give a shit what Creator do as much. Same goes for Destruction. I think Destruction really have been in a rut most of the time. And again, besides some of the classic albums that they had released in the 1980s, after that, I don't think anything else came close until that Devolution album in 2008, 2009. I think it was around that period, which I thought was actually a good album. But that was about it from Destruction, then that was it afterwards. I didn't really care much. But with Sodom, I always just felt that something was just more gripping. Everything was more consistent. It was more solid, even during the changes. And the thing is, Sodom never went in a whole lot of different directions. Everything, at least, whatever was changed, at least was still close to the wheelhouse of Sodom. Again, the sort of punk period, with, beginning with the Oberbit-Misson EP, and then the Get What You Deserved album, Masquerade in Blood. Their punk period, it was still at least close to Sodom's wheelhouse. It wasn't really out of it like how every other thrash metal band during the 90s was kind of doing. Everything had to go industrial, grunge, and so on, just to kind of keep up with the times. But Tom Angel Ripper, he stuck to what he wanted to do, and it was at least close to the wheelhouse of Sodom. And really, nothing was really much of a big departure. Still, everything, they always had ways, as Tom knew how to, figured out ways to make Sodom sound fresh. But where I'm going with this is that when it came to, after listening again, some of those albums and getting into the beginning with In War and Pieces. I mean, I should definitely point out that the Final Sign of Evil, which was also the first reunions with Chris Witchhunter before his untimely passing, but still, that album more of a experiment to kind of get Sodom to sound a little more like how they did in the early period, which of course most of that material anyways on that album was mostly re-recording the In a Sign of Evil EP, but also it was to actually properly record songs that didn't make the cut of that EP, and basically to make it a full album. And that was an attempt. But the thing is, there was a point in time where I loved the Final Sign of Evil, but then going back and listening to it, I think a lot of the charm had worn off. So, and it seemed crazy because, again, when you're going back and listening to, of course, albums like Obsessed by Cruelty and then The Sign of Evil, and then, of course, then to like Persecution Mania and the Experts of Sodomy EP and Agent Orange, and even Better Off Dead, to then Tapping the Vein, and then Code Red and M16 and Get You What You Deserved. You know, everything was solid. Everything just sounded absolutely cohesive. Everything just worked. It was all great. But for some reason, I think after they did the Final Sign of Evil, I think it might have disrupted a lot of the pacing, I feel, for a lot of Sodom albums. Of course, then re-listening to in War and Pieces, I felt it still is a good album. I think that was probably one of the absolute best of that period. But it's still, I would not hold In War and Pieces high enough next to M16, Code Red, and Tapping the Vein, and Agent Orange, and Persecution Mania. I would not hold it high next to those albums. But I still think it was a solid, very good enough, enjoyable album for them. But after that, I feel everything took a bit of a dip. I feel the quality kind of dipped a bit. Not that they were that Epitome of Torture and Decision Day were terrible albums, but I don't think it was quite there. It really I hate to really say, but it seemed like everything was becoming a little more uninspired. They were like almost sounding tired and a little bit bored for some reason. It just didn't come off as exciting. Everything was just too sterile sounding, and I think this is where I will then go back to Burneman. It's respectable that he was able to last that long with Sodom, but I think I can kind of see why Tom Angel Ripper has went through so many different lineups, because in his mind, I think if anything, the best way I can actually understand it, in my view, in my perspective, is that I think he really wanted to keep things more fresh, keep the sound fresh enough, do things a little more to really sound more cohesive in some ways. Even if the lineups will end up being different, he always wanted to keep things fresh in a way. I can understand the method what Tom Angel Ripper did. I mean, I'm still not behind what he did to, of course, Burneman and Maka. Sacking them through social media I thought was not a good idea. But at the same time, I can get why he probably wanted to, in many ways, part ways with them. Because I think, again, if you really listen back to those previous 3 albums in some ways, and then go back and listen to a lot of the classic material, you can tell everything felt different. Not the way that they changed the sound, but something was lacking there. I think it just lacked the quality in some ways. It lacked every bit of the feel. And again, I'm not trying to really put a bad perspective on those albums. I know there are some people that really do more of a job of putting a really bad perspective on albums like Epitome of Torture and Decision Day and even in War and Pieces. But for me personally, I don't think some of those albums did much for me. Even though, again, I will say this. Again, I will say this and say this and say this. In War and Pieces, I thought was a pretty good album, but it still was nowhere near being, the best representation of Sodom, and not be, and there being probably one of the most classic albums. It's not. It wasn't. So basically, in many ways, fast forward, after, of course, Tom Angelripper doing what he did and how he sacked, or how he parted ways with Burning Man and Maka, he decided to, of course, get that a new lineup together, and that was, in many ways, I guess because of him doing some of those shows with Frank Blackfire, that I think in many ways it inspired Tom to want to rehire him back in the band. In doing so, we also got the two new guys here, being York Sigotz and Tony Merkel. And that's where we then led to the Partisan EP in 2018, which was a very solid EP, and you really can tell something that there was a little bit of something that has returned. What was lacking on the previous 3 Sodom albums, all of that was rectified. All of that was definitely more evened out. Everything sounded more coherent. And it just had a very more natural feel to it. It sounded great. It sounded like classic old school Sodom. And again, it just sounded inspired. So, and then of course, expanding on that with Out of the Frontline Trench EP in 2019, with again, the new material like Genesis 19 and Down on Your Knees. And I know I'm also forgetting one more song there. I'm actually am, and which again, oh yeah, Out in the Frontline Trench, that song. So those 3, and along with the 2 new songs on the Partisan EP, you can tell that the band was starting to, that this lineup was promising something. That again, it was sounding very promising, and that it really is probably going to lead to something. And that's when we finally laid into here, the 16th studio album from these guys. That is Genesis 19. So we finally get this, and of course what I heard of the 3 songs that were released prior to this album, that being Sodom and Gomorrah, Indoctrination, and Friendly Fire, it really inspired me to want to actually pre-order this album. These 3 songs definitely inspired me, and it made me really excited to really listen to this album. And finally, when receiving the album and then listening to it, I really have to say, with all the long build-up in my review here and what I've been going through, it seems to really be that this is probably the best of material I think that Sodom has ever put out in a long time. My God. The songs on this album, Sodom and Gomorrah, Indoctrination, and Friendly Fire were great songs, but there's easily just as much good songs on this album. Just look at, eventually I'll get to some of these, but oh my God. I feel that the stuff that we were getting with the Partisan EP and Out of the Frontline Trench EP, both in 2018 and 2019, were like tasters. They were like, again, it was just to kind of, many ways, was to appetize the listeners to kind of what they were going to give us with this album. And I think what they delivered was by far the most lethal, most devastating, the most punishing Sodom album to date at this point. Definitely, it's almost somewhere between like Tapping the Vein and Code Red, in just terms of just absolute brutality. It's like the balance between these two. Of course, there is plenty of the eras. This album has a good way of also representing most of the eras of Sodom, where it be the classic period with Persecution Mania and Agent Orange, and of course even here and there Better Off Dead, which I'll get to a certain song that reminds me of something that could have easily been on Better Off Dead. But besides that, even though I do hear more Persecution Mania, but you also get plenty of stuff again, like Code Red and M16. But then there are some songs where there really are almost at times where the sound of the In the Sign of Evil and Obsessed by Cruelty had a way of just creeping back in to Sodom's sound on this album. Every bit of the eras that of Sodom are really represented here. And again, there's even one song that could have easily been like Get What Deserved. It really, you get every bit of their eras being represented on this album, but for the most part, it still ends up expanding on the sound of albums like Tapping the Vein and Code Red, because especially even more expanding on the almost the death metal sound, because Tapping the Vein was Tom's his his stab at more of a death metal kind of sound. That was like his idea of him trying to really come up with more of a death metal style sound, or kind of like an experiment of how Sodom might be if they were a death metal band. But I think with Genesis 19, I think he's done a way of expanding on that sound and takes it even further with some of the songs on this album. I mean, for example, just listen to, of course, Nishmir Minland and the Harpooner, Dehumanized, and even here and there, Waldo and Pigpen and Friendly Fire, and then of course even at times the Euthanasia track, and even the title track as well. Oh my god. Every bit of it, he's just really, they just had a way of just expanding on that sort of death metal sound, because here and there, this really does push itself towards almost, the death metal spectrum. I mean, some songs here and there, they'll change the pacing. Again, for an example of this, I think the best example will also be in the title track and Nishmir Minland, which in the title track here, it starts off slow, then as it keeps going, it then builds and builds, and then finally gets into being just a straight up raging thrasher. Probably the most, I think, when it comes to this album, it should definitely be pointed out that Tom Angel Ripper hasn't sounded this threatening, this visceral since albums like Tapping the Vein, Code Red, and Persecution Mania, and at times even Obsessed by Cruelty. He just sounds fantastic on this album. Definitely the best way what I'm trying to come up with. But what I'm trying to get in on Genesis 19, the song, it's like how it builds from this, and then all of a sudden within the middle of the song, it then breaks into more of a cleaner mid, very similar to what you might have gone on like Persecution Mania or Agent Orange. But eventually after that, we get, again, it then builds back up with the great guitar solo from Frank Blackfire, which, again, it's just so nice to hear him back in the band. It's just so nice to hear him. But it just has this way of where it goes back and forth. It's got a very cool way of pacing things out. But then we get into, of course, then with Nishmir Minland. With this song, I mean, it all goes from Euthanasia to Genesis 19 and Nishmir Minland, where these three are blending together. They transition from one to the other. But after that, it's a cool dynamic. It's a really cool dynamic. But with Nishmir Minland, what you're just given, right from the fucking get-go, you're just absolutely are just sledgehammered with blast beats, and oh my god! And from after that, it only lasts for I think a minute or 30 or 50 seconds. Before then, it just slows down a bit and gets to just a down and just slow, heavy song. Again, very pushing things towards the death metal spectrum. It's just a fucking raw, dirty, filthy freaking track. Again, I hadn't heard Sodom sound this threatening, this menacing in a long time. This is fucking badass. It's a badass song, but we get plenty of other, again, same thing, it gets expanded with the Harpooner and Dehumanized as well, and they're both good songs. Then Friendly Fire and Waldo and Pigpen, they're just, all of these songs really just have a way of working, and they definitely expand a lot on that sort of almost death metal-ish bass sound. It's still thrash metal, but it just sounds absolutely brutal. And again, the dynamic between Frank Blackfire and York Sagatz, it just works. Everything plays well. Again, having the dual guitars, I think really works. It really adds just a whole new dimension to Sodom's sound, and it definitely is great. But there's really nothing bad on this album. There really isn't. But these are just, to me, as far as to kind of get the point across of the more really extreme sound is just great. As far as just classic thrashers, I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah is a good song too. That also, I feel it could be a bit of a throwback to the earlier period of Sodom. But then, of course, songs like Euthanasia. Oh, wow. This is probably, when on first listen, and still when I listen to this album, this is probably my personal favorite song on the album. This is definitely combining almost the sort of brutality of Tapping the Vein, but combining it with just the brutal thrash of Code Red. It could have easily fit on any of those two albums. It's just a barn burner of a song. I just love it. It's so goddamn good of a song. Euthanasia is definitely one of my personal favorites on this album. Cult Perpetrator. to me, this is when I was alluding to the fact that there's at least a song in here that could have easily been on like Better Off Dead. I feel Occult Perpetrator is the one. This one just has that kind of almost more mature, but it has a way of working in the album because it's still a freaking great thrash metal song. It's still heavy. It's still brutal in its own right. But there's some parts of the song where it gives me that Better Off Dead kind of feel, but it works. Again, just with the energetic playing of Tony Merkel and Jörg Sagatz and Frank Blackfire, I think it ends up working in line with songs like, for example, like The Harpooner and Dehumanized, and again, songs like that are Euthanasia. It works in there. It's definitely still a very filthy fucking song, and it's just great. So great song there. Other songs like Indoctrination. This song could have easily been on Get What You Deserved. Again, it's very similar to the song Sodomized off of that album, with again which again the song Sodomized being on both of the Arbor Bit Misan EP and Get What You Deserved. So it's very much similar. It's got that more punky feel to it, but it's a good song. So then, of course, that's I think, and then Glock and Roll. I feel that could have also at times been on like Code Red, or maybe here and there, maybe M16. So that kind of thing. Same goes for the song Weldon Pigpen, which this one's kind of interesting because this is definitely again part of Tom Angel Ripper's his interesting, I wouldn't say obsession, but his fascination is the best way to put it with the Vietnam War, because this is actually inspired by, in history, one of the bravest acts in all of history, in all of Vietnam, and it's an historical piece. And again, there's audio of these two online. And the thing is, this song I believe was inspired by this event. And this is definitely was Tom Angel Ripper's way of, in many ways, to pay tribute to one of the bravest acts in all of war history, and especially for Vietnam. It was definitely just, again, the best word is brave. The act of bravery, of just definitely of responding to being absolutely just inhaled by bullets, and yet still staying calm. So just nothing was phasing these two, no matter how much they were getting just fired on in just war. So that's what this song is somewhat inspired by. It's a good song. The way it starts off, very brooding, dark, and then of course again into just absolutely unleashing hell. It's a good song. I think this was definitely his way of paying tribute to that act of bravery from those two gentlemen in war. So there you go. There's just, what else can I really talk about? There's just so many good songs on this album. I just feel this really has this is definitely Sodom being back at being what they were, definitely recognizing of what made classic albums like Persecution Mania and Agent Orange, or even Tapping the Vein and Code Red and M16 so great. Again, this is just to me, this is personally probably up there as one of Sodom's best albums. After the previous three, I think this is definitely with some of their best material. I just love every bit of this album. Even the production, the mixing. This is also the most natural sounding Sodom albums as well, and I like the more analogy, earthy feel of this album. It just is great. Every one of them, they just sound fantastic. There's just so many good songs in there. I love, again, how some songs start off slow, and the thing is also, I definitely forgot to mention that some of the songs, like again, like that where I get this sort of obsessed by cruelty or in the sign of evil feel is also how the way certain songs start. Like example for the title track and the Harpooner and Dehumanized. They tend to really start off pretty slow and doomy. Again, very similar to Obsessed by Cruelty, but if played more tighter and if more updated within today's standard, like if those albums or those songs off of there that had that really almost brooding intro, how they would have sounded in today's atmosphere. But again, it just comes off cool, and again, that sort of death metal aspect. every bit of this album. This is pretty much, again, like I've stated, is like expanding on the sounds of albums like Tapping the Vein and Code Red. Just the sheer brutality and the menacing nature of this album, and just how threatening the band sounds. Just fantastic. So I don't know. There really isn't very much else I can now say. It's just, I think this is some of the most strongest material they've put, I think, on the album in a long time. So there you go. Alright, so there you go. There is my review for Genesis 19, and my score is a 9.95 out of 10. Definitely, though, close to being 100. This is definitely a pretty high score for this album. I think even for compared to Decision Day from Sodom. I know it's been a long time since I've remembered what score I gave toward Decision Day from them, and I can't find any of my notebooks or my notes anyways for what kind of score I would have given that album. But to be quite honest, since then it wouldn't have been a 9.95. But this album right here, Genesis 19, oh hell yes, it's definitely, I feel it is very worthy of the scoring of 9.95. Again, 9.95 is basically still, it's a 9 out of 10, but it just pushes it. That 95%, what I think, just to kind of get so in many ways, it's just all worthy of being given that high score. So it's just, I think it's all great and it works out. So I just think this was a solid album from Sodom. Again, this album has been out since November 27th, and I know any of you who are at least fans of Sodom, and since it's been out, I know all of you probably have definitely listened to the album. So with that, I know all of you have your thoughts, so if you have any thoughts, leave them in the comments section below. But if any of you haven't even heard this album and might have dropped off as far as the Sodom bandwagon, or haven't really kept up and don't know how well how this album's gonna be, or how well you're gonna feel toward this album, I think I recommend checking out Genesis 19. I think this is a solid addition to the Sodom discography. I think that this is a great album from these guys, and I think for any of you who likes the more albums like Tapping the Vein and Code Red, or even Persecution Mania, or some of the classic material to begin with, I can't see you not liking this album. Again, with songs like Euthanasia and Genesis 19 and Sodom and Gomorrah and Dehumanized and Glock and Roll, or Indoctrination or Friendly Fire, I can't see anybody who's a fan of just this kind of brand of thrash metal to not bob or bang your head to, or just fist pump. I can't see any of you not doing any of those or performing any of those acts while listening to this album, just moshing in your bedroom. I can't see any of you not doing such. Again, every time I hear Euthanasia, I immediately just get into fucking banging my head. I immediately do. The hair just flies everywhere. I'm just absolutely going nuts. It puts me in a frenzy. I just love every bit of that song. So there you go. I hope you all enjoyed. This is Every Thrasher Sam out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone. I know this is a long review, so with that, take care.